Alright guys, we are back in my garage for another video, and unfortunately after just 6 months of ownership, I've already had to bring my Taycan to the dealer. And I know it sounds like a first world problem because most people bring their cars to the dealer from time to time, but with an electric car, that's something that you don't expect to do. Most of these cars have a maintenance plan where you only go to the dealer maybe every 2 years just to check your brake pads and stuff like that. But there's a pretty significant issue with these cars that is basically going to require you to go to the dealer more than that. If you get a Taycan, expect to probably go a couple times a year simply because of recalls. And we got our first recall letter, I believe, back in March or April. So again, just after a couple months of ownership. And I just kind of wanted to explain what my experience was and my thoughts on why this is such a significant issue. So we got our first recall letter, like I said, and called the dealership to set up an appointment, and they set us up for May. So about a month later, they told us we could come in and get the recall done. But imagine my surprise when they said I didn't have just one recall, I had 3 open recalls. So I got one letter for one recall, and when they checked my VIN, there were actually 2 other ones that I also needed to do. No big deal, let's go ahead and go do it. They're just software updates. And then they told me it was going to take 3 days to complete. Each recall was going to take a full day of programming, so I would need to drop the car off for 3 days. That completely blew my mind. And I've heard of people being in that situation before, where their car has to stay overnight, at least a day, pretty much any time it gets dropped off, because of how these cars are built. And again, I'll get into that in a little more detail later. But said whatever, they'll give me a loaner. I was kind of excited because I thought they'd give me an electric car, so I was like, cool, maybe it's something I can do a review on. Let's go ahead and get this set up. Day for the recall comes around and they call me and they say they have to reschedule. Not because the loaner isn't there, not because they have too many other cars, but because some people that have gotten the recalls done have found that after the software is finished, they can't start the car. The car doesn't work. And that is my personal biggest concern with bringing my car to a dealer, because I don't want to have to deal with a car that's been working fine and suddenly it doesn't. You know, I'm that guy that does everything myself because at least if there's a problem, I know I caused it. And so hearing that they've done a recall software update that could potentially make your car inoperative, pretty much my biggest fear come to life. So I gladly waited. I said whenever Porsche figures out this software update, we'll get it done. They rescheduled me for June, and that's why we just kind of got it done here now at the end of the month. So finally went to bring the car to the dealership, and that process went pretty smoothly. But after a discussion with the service manager, I was actually, again, surprised. There's 3 total. And how long will it take? Is it 3 days?
Shouldn't take 3 days. So long we're like you. We'd like you all done today, but we'll let you
Oh,
know.
okay.
We'll give you a call at the end of the day, either way.
Okay, sure. So here I was, I guess, looking crazy because the person on the phone told me it was going to take 3 days, and now he's telling me they should be able to do all 3 within a day. So a lot less of a time issue, I guess. They still gave me a loaner. I got this Macan. I didn't get the electric vehicle that I thought I wanted, but you know, no big deal. Drop the car off, give them the keys, figure, you know, by the end of the day the car should be done. I dropped the car off at 8:30, and by 1:30 they called me saying the car was complete. So again, surprise now in the positive direction. They told me it was going to take less time than they anticipated. Then it took even less time than they told me it was going to take. So I was a happy camper. Again, with the Macan, it was not the best experience. I don't want to say that we don't like the car, but it's funny because we were actually cross-shopping the Taycan and the Macan, and we ended up in this car for a lot of different reasons. So thought I was going to have it for a little while, maybe do a review and talk about that. If you guys are interested in my thoughts or cross-shopping those cars, let me know, and I can kind of share why we ended up with a Taycan. But you know, gladly gave it back. So gave the Macan back, went and picked up the car, and we ended up getting the 3 recalls done, no issues. So at this point, we've gotten everything done. I've got the service write-up, so let's go ahead and go over what the actual recalls were for. So the first one is ASB2, and what they did is they reprogrammed the rear view camera. Now, I think the funniest thing about this is everybody was actually really excited about this one. This was probably the recall that everybody wanted because the reverse camera on these cars are horrible. I don't know why it's so skewed, and it's got this weird fisheye kind of distortion built into it, which obviously a camera doesn't just look like that by default. So it's something I'm sure they did deliberately to make it look that way, maybe to increase the viewing angle or something, but it's horrible. It's unintuitive and it needed to be addressed. So got the recall done and it did absolutely nothing for that. And I looked into it and apparently it's more about the reverse camera not turning on when it's supposed to. I guess sometimes when people put the car in reverse, the rear view camera wouldn't turn on. That was considered a safety issue. So that's why it turned into a recall. So unfortunately, it doesn't fix the horrible viewing angle of the reverse camera, but it is better to have the camera turn on than nothing. The next one is WSS4, and this is for the charger, which I have the low wattage charger, the 11 kilowatt charger. The higher one, I think it's like 22 or whatever, is known to have issues. So that's another reason why we got more of a base model with less options. And they reprogrammed that to make sure that it avoids any issues. So the 11 kilowatt one isn't really known to have issues, but I think both versions of the onboard charger got this recall just to avoid problems. I think it's also supposed to avoid issues with actually charging the car. So sometimes when people plug in the car, they get warnings saying like the battery's too hot or, different issues. So it should avoid all of that to make sure it charges every time you plug it in. And then the last one was WSS6, and this was for the 12-volt battery. If you don't know, this car has two batteries. It has the main one that powers, the driving motors and all of the main functions for moving the car. And then it also has a regular 12-volt battery to support all the accessories and things that can't run on hundreds of volts safely. And they reprogrammed it because I have heard of this being an issue as well. A lot of people say that they leave their car sitting for a while and then it won't start. And what's supposed to happen is the main battery charges the smaller 12-volt battery. So when you're using the accessories, going in and out of the car and stuff, it doesn't run it all the way down. So I believe that what this does is it adjusts the sensor to avoid those issues. It makes sure that the 12-volt battery stays charged. So even if you go on vacation or whatever, the car's parked for a couple weeks for whatever reason, it'll avoid running down the 12-volt battery and keep that charged up. So that is definitely a good one. So all of this, I think, just illustrates the biggest issue with the Taycan, and my probably biggest concern with the car is that these recalls cannot be done easily because they didn't build the Porsche for electric vehicle owners. They are kind of like the BMW with this new M3. They spent a lot of time trying to convince 911 owners and Porsche fans that this was going to be a great car, instead of benchmarking other EVs and other EV owners and what they want when they put this car together. So now, instead of making a car that people that are already interested in EVs would want to go for, you're stuck with Porsche owners complaining about their first EV because they don't know what the experience is supposed to be. I know somebody's going to tell me I'm way off base here, but Porsche just does not do a good job with technology. I mean, it's fine, but that's not really their forte. Their forte is suspension and, vehicle balance and all of that stuff. They know how to make a car handle well, but like the PCM, for example, the Porsche Communication Management System, is nowhere near as good as iDrive. And like I said, the issue with the rear view camera, everybody was excited to get that done because the rear view cameras in these cars are horrible, and they were hoping that it would help with the weird fisheye lens aspect ratio and stuff and make it something that looks a lot more natural. But of course, it had nothing to do with that. And there are just so many little nitpicky issues with the systems in this car that I think Porsche could address if they would focus on it, but they're just not. And so it lends into why this car is just not matching the benchmark of other EVs. You would never need to bring a Tesla to a dealership to get recall updates multiple times a year, but that's completely standard for this car because they didn't build it with the capability to do over-the-air updates. So every time you have to bring it, plug it in. Like I said, in my case, I really didn't have to wait that long, but it's not uncommon for people having to wait for days for a recall. And, it's just weird that that's kind of how this car is set up right now. So that I think is the biggest issue with this car, and probably the biggest struggle with why they aren't selling well. If you guys have seen some of the more recent updates, they mentioned that the Sport Turismo has been discontinued, which personally was my favorite body style of the Taycan. That's definitely what I would go for if I was building one for myself. And now it's gone. Everybody that loved the wagons no longer has the Taycan wagon option. And even for the regular sedan Taycan like what we got, they stopped production for a week because orders were so low. They had no reason to make that many, so they shut down the plant for a week. And I've heard that the next version is going to be combined with the Panamera because those also aren't selling that well. And they're going to try to do either like an EV Panamera or maybe a hybrid and just make them all on one platform. But it's just, this car isn't going to make it with the way that they designed it. They need to focus on what other EV owners want to make this the best EV, not just an EV alternative for Porsche owners. But that's my perspective. That's probably the biggest complaint that I see from other Taycan owners, is they always have to drop their car off at the dealership for recalls. Thankfully, nothing actually broke. Everything else is okay with the car. This was all kind of, in advance to prevent something from happening and avoiding safety concerns and stuff. But again, first world problem, but pretty big frustration when you get a car that you're hoping you can just keep at home and never have to really drop it off anywhere. So I'll let you guys know if any other recalls come out. As always, I'll keep you up to date on how this car is doing, but thankfully we're back on the road. It's starting every time. There are no actual issues with drivability and stuff, and hopefully it stays that way for a very long time. So let me know if you're a Taycan owner. How many recalls have you done? Has your experience been any different than mine, or did you get some of these recalls done and it didn't work the first time? As always, curious to hear your thoughts. But otherwise, that's it for this video. So thank you guys for watching, and I hope this helps. And if you have any other questions or comments, leave them down below.